Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. The book continues with part 1, which tells in detail the conquest of Egypt, which happened under the Rashidun Caliphate from 639 AD to 646 AD. This conquest brought an end to the Roman Byzantine reign over Egypt, which first began in 30 BC. Egypt was also conquered and occupied by the Sassanid Empire from 618 AD to 629 AD, from the Byzantines before it was reconquered by Emperor Heraclius. Start of Chapter 2. The Reluctant Caliph. The plague of amrbinalaas struck in January or February 639 AD, Muharram or Safar 18 Hijri, and ravaged Syria and Palestine. The Muslim army suffered terribly from the onslaught of the plague, and 20,000 people fell before its foul breath. It decimated Muslims and Christians and Jews, and none was safe from its diseased clutches. Even Abu Ubaidah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was commander of the Muslim army in Syria, and two of his corps commanders, Shurahbil bin Hassana and Yazid bin Abi Sufyan radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, died of the contagion, and it is said that Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was a much-married man, lost 40 sons in the plague of amrbinalaas. The sufferings of the Muslims continued until amrbinalaas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the only surviving one of the original corps commanders who had invaded Syria, took command of the army and moved it quickly from the plains to the hilly area of Syria, where the air was cleaner and the water purer. This saved the Muslim army which, having annihilated many Roman armies in Syria, would itself have been annihilated by the plague. Having saved the Muslims from destruction, Amr radiallahu ta'ala anhu remained in command of the army in Syria and Palestine with his headquarters at Jabiya, a cantonment constructed by Abu Ubaidah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, a little north of the plain of Yarmouk, and it was as army commander that he received Caliph Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu when in late 18 Hijri he came on one of his 4 visits to the western province of Islam. Umar had learned to be careful with amrbinalaas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He knew that he was dealing with an unusually sharp mind, one whom Caliph Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu had called the shrewdest of the Quraysh. Umar was undoubtedly one of the ablest men in the Muslim world, and was a master not only of the clean fighting of war, but also of the dirty scrapping of politics. He would proudly proclaim that no one had ever tricked him, and no one ever had. Apart from his remarkable brain, he had also the gift of eloquence, as in fact many Arabs did. He was a great talker, though unlike many talkers, what he said made sense. It is reported that whenever Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu met a man who would not stop talking, he would say, "Glory be to him who created you," and created amrbinalaas. The Caliph and his army commander in the west met at Jabiya, where Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu had travelled to see his troops. The year 18 Hijri was coming to an end. Umar began to work on the Caliph. 2 years earlier, after Jerusalem had surrendered to Umar had broached the subject tentatively, but there had been no encouragement from the Caliph. Now he set about his task in right earnest. The two conferred separately, and the general outlined his ideas about conquering Egypt. He ended with the words, "O commander of the faithful, permit me to march on Egypt. If you conquer it, it will be a source of strength and sustenance for the Muslims. It is the richest of lands on earth and the weakest in defending itself." The Caliph was not convinced. He feared for the safety of the Muslims and was averse to Umar's plans for the invasion of vast land like Egypt. He tended to be cautious in military matters. As a matter of fact, although the armies of Islam made great conquests during the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, many of these were due to the pressure of his generals rather than his own wish to expand the domain of Islam. In the northeast, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu had held Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas radiallahu ta'ala anhu back after he had defeated the Persians at Qadisiyah and Ctesiphon. And it was only when provoked by Persian counterattacks that he allowed the Muslims to go on to the final battle against the Persians at Nehawand. In the west, he had refused permission to Muawiyah radiallahu ta'ala anhu to invade Cyprus. He did not wish to extend Muslim armies beyond the point where he was sure of holding his gains. And now, this stocky, aggressive general was trying to draw him into another venture, one which could be fraught with danger. But Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu persisted and brought his eloquence into full play. He continued to press his case, emphasizing how easy it was to conquer Egypt and what tremendous benefit would accrue from its conquest to the state of Islam, until at last Umar relented. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu could proceed on the campaign with 4,000 men. This was not much of a force, but Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu had himself made the operation seem so easy that he could not very well ask for more troops, and was in any case not going to do so for fear that the Caliph might call off the operation altogether. And Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, for his part, preferred to send a relatively small force to Egypt so that in case of disaster, Muslim losses would be limited. This was the smallest force ever sent by Islam to conquer a foreign land. The Caliph said, "Go, and I shall seek Allah's guidance in the matter of your going. You will shortly receive a letter from me if Allah wills it. And if it reaches you before you have entered Egypt or part of it, and I instruct you to turn back from Egypt, then turn back. But if you have entered it before my letter reaches you, then go forward and seek Allah's help and depend upon Him for succor." This was all that Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu needed. He set off from Jabiyah that very night with 4,000 stalwarts. Umar was left alone with his fears. He began to have second thoughts, and the more he thought, the more apprehensive he grew about the consequences of the venture into which Umar was going to plunge himself. He felt that he had let himself be talked into a campaign for which he really had no desire, but having reluctantly given permission to Umar to invade Egypt, he was now reluctant to withdraw that permission. The following day, he mentioned to Usman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was to later succeed him as Caliph, that he had permitted amrbinalaas radiallahu ta'ala anhu to march on Egypt, and Usman's response did nothing to calm his fears. "O Commander of the Faithful," said Usman, "Umar is an ambitious man and loves to have his own command. I fear that he will go without security and without sufficient strength, and will lead the Muslims to their destruction in pursuit of an opportunity without any assurance of success." It took Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu only a little more to make up his mind that he was not going to have anything to do with Egypt. So he wrote to Umar, "You have marched to Egypt with those who are with you. In there is a multitude of Romans while the men with you are few. If this letter reaches you before you have entered Egypt, turn back. But if it reaches you after you have entered it, then proceed, and know that I shall help you." Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu sealed the letter and gave it to a man named uqbabinnafe radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who would act as the Caliph's messenger. Umar told him to ride with all speed in the wake of the small army of amrbinalaas, catch up with the general, if possible before he entered Egypt, and hand him the letter. Uqba took leave of the Caliph and set off on a fast camel in pursuit of Umar. He was aware of the contents of the letter and knew that his ride was a historic one. that the fate of Egypt and of the Muslim army preparing to invade it depended on this ride. His race with amrbinalaas for the Egyptian border, and Amr, fearful of the possibility of the Caliph countermanding his earlier order, moved fast towards Egypt. He had got to Rafah, a little short of the Egyptian frontier, when the Caliph's messenger caught up with him and offered him the Caliph's letter. Amr was not the man to let the fears of Umar which he regarded as quite unjustified, deter him from the venture he had set his heart upon. He was determined to take Egypt, and his shrewd understanding of the working of the Caliph's mind left him in no doubt as to the contents of the Caliph's letter. Significantly, Rafah was notorious at the time as a town of thieves, it being said that even the dogs of Rafah were more thievish than dogs of other places. And Amar's next action was characteristic of the man. He ordered the messenger to keep the letter for a while and set his small army in motion again. A few hours later they had reached the small town of Shajratain, between Rafah and Arish, which he knew was the first town of Egypt and marked its border. He confirmed this by questioning one of the local inhabitants. Amr then sent for the messenger, took the letter, opened and read it. It was as he had suspected. He turned to the Muslims who stood around him and innocently asked, "Do you not know that this town is in Egypt?" "Yes," they replied. He then told them about the Caliph's instructions to him and added, "His letter did not reach me until after we had entered Egypt, so march on and seek Allah's blessings." Some years later, after the Muslims had conquered many lands, Caliph Umar wrote to a certain well-known scholar, "We are Arabs, and God has given us victory over the lands. We must take possession of the earth and inhabit the lands and the cities. So describe to me the cities, their climate and their dwellings, and what effect their soil and their climate have upon the inhabitants." In reply, the scholar wrote, "Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that Allah Most High has divided the earth into parts, the east, the west, the north, and the south." He went on to describe the various lands conquered by Islam, and then he came to Egypt. As for Egypt, it is a spacious and low-lying land. It is the country of the pharaohs and the home of tyrants. It is only praiseworthy because of the virtue of its Nile. Its defects outnumber its attractions. Its air is motionless, its heat intense, its mischief destructive. It deadens the color, corrupts the intelligence, and increases anger. It is a mine of gold and jewels and emeralds and wealth. It is a land of crops. It fattens the body and darkens the skin and lengthens life. In its people there is cunning and dishonesty and wickedness and guile and deceit. Lo, it is a land to gain, not a land to live in, because of the nearness of its mischief and the abundance of its evil. The Arabs knew a good deal about Egypt, but a good deal of what they knew was fancy and legend rather than fact. Some of these legends are extremely interesting and will be narrated at places in this book, offered by this writer without comment. The Holy Prophet ﷺ is known to have had a soft spot for Egypt and described it as the treasure house of Allah upon the earth. He is also reported to have said, "Whoever wishes to see paradise or look upon the likes of it on earth, let him look at the land of Egypt, when its crops are green and its fruits are ripe." The only one who had first-hand knowledge of Egypt was amrbinalaas, and he had acquired it by traveling to Alexandria in his younger days. In a vague sort of way, however, all knew that Egypt was a vast land with immense wealth, and that it had a history of civilization and refinement unequaled in the world. Geographically, the country stretched north-south from Arish to Aswan, the east-west from Eila, now Eilat in the Gulf of Aqaba, to Barqa near the present Benghazi. and this was the land which Amr set out to conquer in late 18 Hijri, late 639 AD. He was 48 years of age. We will not go into the history of the land which the Muslims were now to invade. The history of Egypt is too long and too complex to be summarized in a few pages. So we will take Egypt as it was in the year 639 and hope that the reader has some knowledge of its ancient past stretching over more than 4,000 years of recorded history before the arrival of the Muslims. As a matter of interest, however, the charming legend of the settlement of Egypt after the flood, as noted by Muslim chroniclers, is given below. It may be and probably is nothing more than a legend. The Prophet Nuh alayhi salam had 3 sons, according to some accounts, 4, Sam, Ham and Japheth. Early one morning, and this was after the flood, he was praying to God to bestow upon his sons and their progeny success and all the good things to life. Suddenly God told him that he would. Delighted at the divine response to his prayers and eager to tell his sons and their sons the good news, he called to them. They were all fast asleep, and none awoke except Sam. He in turn called his sons, but of them also none awoke, except one named Arphaxad. Sam and Arphaxad, father and son, came running to Noah alayhi salam. Nuh alayhi salam prepared to God for his blessings upon these two and their descendants. Nuh alayhi salam then called to Ham, who had not responded to the earlier call. Ham merely turned over and went on sleeping. His sons did not pay any attention either to the old man's call, but his grandson, Misr, son of Baisar, son of Ham, heard the call and came up running. Nuh alayhi salam was delighted to see his young great-grandson. He placed his hand upon the boy's head and prayed to God to bless him and his progeny, to settle him in a fine land which would be the mother of lands, whose rivers would be the greatest of rivers, to give him the best of everything, and make the earth subservient unto him. God settled Misr, along with others of his clan, in Egypt, and allotted him all the lands which lay between Arish and Aswan and between Barca and Eilat. Misr built the city of Memphis, which was the first city built after the flood, and became the father of the Copts. After him this land came to be called Misr, which is the name by which Egypt is known in the world of Islam. And Allah knows best. End of chapter 2.